than others. That doesn't mean that there are more problems associated with one curricular resource than others. In fact, that's not really, that's not what the research says, right? That there's more problems with certain curricula than others. Instead, what I think is happening is that bookworms is relatively new in Michigan, and a lot of districts are adopting it, and so there's a lot of engagement around that. So just because something shows up in multiple columns doesn't mean that we're saying there's a bunch of problems with it. These are just topics that came up in these groups. So here are the main themes that we found that cut across the curricular resources. The main one was books. There were a couple of different problems, but they all kind of fell under the category of books. One is that some of the books are, in some curricula are offensive and or just outdated, like things that they don't reflect our values or our more nuanced ways of thinking about things, like, for example, Christopher Columbus, right? Or the founding fathers, right? There's some sort of hegemonic perspectives being presented, particularly around historical topics, right? So that's one problem that comes up across curriculum. Then there's also just not culturally responsive or diverse enough texts, right? Not enough opportunities for different students to see themselves in the curriculum materials, particularly outside of historical books and historical contexts, right? I know it's Black History Month now, but we want to make sure that Black students do not only ever read about Frederick Douglass and Martin Luther King, right? That they get opportunities to see their daily lives and the children behaving in normal ways that look like them and have lives like them. So that's another issue that came up. So not necessarily outdated or offensive, but just not really representative of the school community. And then the third was just not enough books in the kids' hands, or not enough book volume of text reading across the curriculum. And that came up in some cases because a curriculum is designed to be a phonics supplement, right? Like, so UFly is really not designed to be, it's designed to be a phonics program that you adopt to supplement that part of your instruction. It's not designed to cover all aspects of ELA. But if you've adopted that, you might be thinking, well, okay, but I need to get some books in the kids' hands. I need to make sure we're doing high quality read alouds and picture books. So there are a couple of different issues, but books was a main concern across almost every curricular resource in one of those three ways. Another issue, and this was true for bookworms because it's been recently adopted, but I think would be true for any newly adopted curriculum, is that we don't have a lot of samples of what the the products of working through this curriculum look like yet. This, in particular, the writing samples, but just really any of the book things that we're asking kids to do. We don't have a lot of examples to share with teachers across classrooms about what that would look like and what kids are capable of doing at different grade levels. Pacing and time was a challenge. Again, I think this would be a challenge for any new curriculum, and for many of these comprehensive literacy ELA curricula that try to do everything, right? Figuring out how to fit everything in. Core knowledge has these two big blocks that are hard to fit in and have a lot of content, and each one is the skills and one is the language and literacy, listening and learning, sorry, I think it's called. And then bookworms, of course, has 3 different 45-minute blocks. So figuring out how to get through all the content with it in this topic is sort of like figuring out how to get through the content in the amount of time you have, but also how to fit those blocks into your day, around specials and everything else, and lunch and the recess and all the other things that kids need to do. So pacing and time was another thing that came up across resources. Writing was a particular concern. Annie has spoken about some of the issues with the Old Wonders and how it addressed writing, but whether or not there's enough process writing and enough scaffolding for writing came up for EL education and for into reading, and was a concern across many resources, because again, many of them are focused on reading, rather than balancing reading and writing and thinking about that whole portfolio. Another issue was just organization. Too many parts, too many things happening, too many different routines to master, and sort of the teachers feeling overwhelmed by all the different things that they had to figure out and fit into their day. This is a little bit distinct from the pacing and time, because it's more about the content and the organization and being able to find what you need when you need it and that kind of thing. Differentiation is a challenge. That's something that I think Tanya spoke about really well earlier today, and why that's important, how it's not just about putting kids in differentiated small groups, but finding ways to differentiate throughout the day, and having tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 instruction all be able to be differentiated in forms of product and process, and other types of support that we offer. So that's another challenge, particularly with bookworms and DRI, that really highlight that differentiation. And then assessment and progress monitoring was a concern. In many cases, when districts are moving to a new curriculum, it doesn't align well with their old assessments, or they're not sure how it aligns, or they're not sure how to tell based on the work that children are producing if kids are making the progress that they've been used to seeing. This is something that I know has come up in our district for bookworms, but I think would come up with any shift to a new curriculum, figuring out if kids are still on track, if they're behind where they used to be, if they're ahead where they used to be, how to match up with what they're doing in the curriculum with the benchmarks that we're comfortable with seeing. And this comes up a lot with report carding, right? Sometimes our report cards are already written to reflect our old benchmarks, our old curricular progress monitoring, and our old assessments, and figuring out how to map those onto the new program can be very challenging. Somebody emailed me about this in regards to bookworms, and then I never responded, and I apologize because it was like over Christmas break. But this was a challenge here with bookworms, and I know that there was quite a bit of time that the coaches spent with teachers trying to map the standards that are listed in our report card with the activities and the sort of artifacts that students would be creating, particularly in kindergarten in bookworms, so that you could see that you could actually figure out how to translate what they were doing in the classroom to a report card or an assessment type of our old assessment paradigm. And then there was a lot of concern about research alignment with Essentials 4 and 5, whether whether Haggerty or allocation or interreading in particular, whether they were really matching up with the principles that are embodied in those essentials. And we've talked a lot about 4 and 5 in the previous session, so that makes sense. And then finally, the comprehension instruction. Are children getting enough focus on that higher level, higher order thinking, enough opportunities? If we are working with something like UFLA or Haggerty that's really focused on Essentials 4 and 5, how can we add other things into the day to make sure that that comprehension instruction is rich and varied? So those were sort of the main things that popped up across our groups. And those are the things we'll be working. So we'll be breaking out and working on those topics today. And like I said, we got more into documenting problems than we did into solving the problems, just because of the short amount of time. So today, what we want to do is reorganize around particular problems and dig into some problem solving. Are you able to advance the slide, Annie? I'm sorry, I don't know if it makes sense to switch share.
Supposed to be on this PD.
Are you able to switch?
I was just going to say, do you want me to give you screen sharing? Because you can do that. I can screen share.
Oh wait, can I? Well, I can switch over to my slides. Yeah.
Is that better for you? Because I can.
Probably, yeah. All right, let me share. Let's see here. And I'll come back to where we were. All right, so now I'm sharing. Sorry about the delay, everyone. Okay, so to get back to where we were. And so what we wanted to do was kind of talk through some examples of problems that we've solved, problems like this that we've solved, and some resources that might be helpful. So I wanted to talk specifically building on what I was talking, my talk earlier, thinking about digital text, highlighting read aloud books. This is like I said, books are one of the issues that came up across more than really any other issue across curricular resources. And so one of the things that we can do, both within comprehensive ELA curricula and to supplement more narrow foundational skills curricula like Haggerty, Foundations, UFLA, that kind of thing, is to really check in with our read alouds and make sure that the read aloud and the material that we're using for read alouds are, age appropriate and including a wide variety of culturally relevant things, but also that they have enough content there to build knowledge of what we call call word and world knowledge, right? To build that vocabulary and also to build knowledge of text structure, features, and background knowledge, and offer children opportunities to develop their comprehension strategies. So Tanya talked about this a little bit earlier, and I talked about this too, about how when we were selecting texts for read alouds, we want to make sure those are challenging enough to offer something new beyond what children would be able to read on their own. And so this is a place in many curricula where we can do some more book selecting and book book adding in to help us expand what children are getting. So we're really returning to thinking about how to supplement around Essential 2. So we've talked about this a little bit. One possible solution, if you have a curriculum that is structured on books that just aren't diverse or don't have enough diversity or don't reflect the cultural values of your community, you can replace the books. And we've already talked about this and how that's one option. You can keep the structure, continue to teach the comprehension strategies or use the fluency strategies that are being used in the curriculum and just replace the books. This is, of course, challenging because you have to do some rewriting, right? You have to have somebody who's available to identify the ideal books and then rewrite the the comprehension questions and the activities, pick a different graphic organizer or anchor chart, that kind of thing. But that is absolutely an option that I know many districts have engaged in. But we can also think about how to add in. We don't have to replace the book. So it's not realistic to replace books, or it's not that there's anything wrong with the books. They're just not really getting at the full diversity of, human experience that we want children to get to encounter in school. That we can also use our differentiated time or differentiation, as Tanya was talking about it earlier, to incorporate more titles and options, or to deepen our engagement with the ones that we actually do like or think are good reflections, right? So for example, if you're using the DRI model, there are dictated sentences lessons that sometimes we never get to in kindergarten, or like sometimes teachers skip over because it sounds kind of boring, like we're just dictating sentences to the kids. But actually, this is where they get to engage with some high quality books if you want them to. You get to pick as a teacher the books that you're using for these lessons. And a lot of the modeled lessons are just like little leveled text that kids can read by themselves, which is fine. It's a good use of a leveled text because it's a pattern, right? It's a good writing mentor text. But these could easily be built onto read aloud lessons. So if you had a high quality read aloud book that you did as a whole group, you could take the small group and have them write in response to that high quality read aloud. So you're sort of extending the engagement with a book that actually that you do like and that you feel like the kids are really engaged with. Or you could add in a read aloud and then have the kids write in response to that book. So you aren't restricted just to the books that are that are out in your curriculum. Similarly, in the DRI model, there are fluency and comp and vocabulary and comp lessons. And this is where you can really have a lot of choice as a teacher or offer students choices. I know that in my son's classroom right now, the VAC groups are like basically book groups where they get to choose a book and then they read it together, sort of like a literature circle, and they discuss it as they go. So these are opportunities to add in books that reflect the values and the culture and the students in your classroom. And you can, doesn't have to be bookworms, any sort of curriculum that has opportunities for differentiation, that's an opportunity to differentiate the text that students are reading. I know we're moving away from differentiating by text level, but that doesn't mean all kids have to read the same book, right? Kids could be reading different books on similar topics. For example, some kids could be reading My Side of the Mountain, and some kids could be reading Hatchet, and some kids could be reading a different sort of survival story. And they could all come together and kind of talk about that as a genre. Another solution is to build around the curricular texts by adding more books in an intentional text sets. One of text sets, allowing kids to read extensively on a particular topic is a recommended strategy to build background knowledge and comprehension of text. And so a possible solution is if you have a text that you have to read as part of your curriculum because it's already built in, to think about what other texts could be paired with that to either extend the children's knowledge and engagement with that text and that set of ideas, or to kind of critically engage with it, right? If you have a target text about like European explorers that you don't think presents, indigenous perspectives very well, bring in some more texts to pair with it and to help encourage critical thinking around that text. I'm linking, I'm highlighting here a reading teacher article about using text sets in elementary classrooms to support knowledge building and interdisciplinary learning. This is my colleague Sarah Lupo's work. She recommends choosing a target text and then building sort of around that text by including some texts that are accessible and interesting to kids to read on their own, sometimes giving them choices, and then some informational texts that build background knowledge. So if you have a target text in your curriculum that is okay, but not really the full perspective, some informational texts about the effects of European exploration, some personal narratives about the experiences of indigenous people, and then what she calls a hook text or video that kind of gets kids interested in the idea, can all be paired with a text to encourage critical thinking and make sure we're not just presenting one perspective. So that's another possible solution. And then finally, and here are some examples, sorry, of like, for example, Black History Month February text sets that can really deepen engagement and knowledge around the things that we are interested in, and provide context for the things that we think, for books that we might not think cover the topics as well as we want. And then there are also digital opportunities on these digital text tools that I spoke about earlier to create text sets fairly easily. As I mentioned, some classrooms, you can do this in Epic, and you can also do this in mel.org. And this is an opportunity to have kids learn about a topic by reading multiple texts on that topic that they can discover and explore for themselves. So this can be part of project-based learning, but can also just be part of independent reading time where they explore. And one of the things that I wanted to highlight from what I presented earlier is that there absolutely are, the digital text absolutely can provide more diversity and quality than any sort of one curriculum can provide, and any really one physical library. One thing I did notice from my observations is that when I went into a classroom where children were able to select digital text that they were interested in, kids were reading books that like every kid was able to pick a book that was interesting to them, and kids were much more likely to be reading books about kids that looked like them. That was just like, it was easier for them to find those books and gravitate towards them if that's what and that was something that the digital text really did add to the classroom library ecosystem. And so if you to highlight again, the books that we thought were the two text tools that we recommend for text diversity and quality were Epic, which does have quite a lot of options, including multilingual options in several different languages. But also I want to highlight Storyline Online. I mentioned this earlier as well, but this is completely free, and it's a nonprofit organization. So these are read alouds of high quality, authentic children's literature, like very high quality picture books. They have they really do prioritize diverse and interesting texts that are culturally relevant. And the thing that I actually really love about it is that they often pair, they also highlight diverse readers, right? So this is Angela Bassett, for example, reading Trombone Shorty. And so children have an opportunity not just to hear diverse text read aloud, but to hear them read aloud in dialect, with people with voices that are not just their white teachers necessarily. So this is an opportunity to get diverse readers as well as diverse books in front of kids. And again, this is a read aloud type of thing, not something that where you're asking kids to read independently. But of course, we don't just want to put a read aloud video in front of kids, but we can still think about using the read alouds in the classroom as making them interactive. And so We can still do all the things with a read aloud video from something like Story Online, as we can do with an interactive read aloud by thinking about the text and building knowledge and identifying vocabulary before reading, stopping throughout the video during video to highlight print concepts, text features, and key vocabulary, model comprehension and word learning strategies, and ask and answer questions that the kids have them make predictions and that kind of thing. Afterwards, by having a whole group discussion. So just because something is a digital text or a video doesn't mean it can't be interactive and have all those high quality things. And in fact, Storyline Online actually provides lesson plans. They're not the best. I mean, they're not like, necessarily what you would come up with on your own if you had unlimited time, but they're for very high quality books, and they have before, during, and after viewing activities that are aligned to Common Core state standards. So this is something that can get teachers started using these newer texts without having to do a ton of work on their own to prep. So this is a tool that I highly recommend to help diversify the text in your curriculum if you feel like you just can't get behind some of those books. You just feel like they're not covering everything. There's also more resources on mel.org that you can access for free. There are you can permalink books in Google Classroom, and there's also Starfall, which is kind of on the other end of the spectrum, a really good source of decodables and foundational skills texts. That was the only program that we looked at that had really good decodable texts available in a digital space. So that's actually available for free through mel.org as well. So that's sort of one way those are a couple of different solutions for the books problem that we came up with. And I'm going to turn it back over to Annie now.
Thanks, Laura. I'm always impressed with how many things you share in such a short time. So if you do have questions, you can put them into the chat, and then, Laura and I'm going to share a few things with you now, but then, you'll be in breakout rooms kind of working. So if there's anything in particular you want to put in the chat for Laura for feedback or other things, then we'll have a little bit of an opportunity in between popping into rooms to look at those as well. So yes, Tracy, it does. And thank you for the lovely connections that you made for all of us, and the beautiful presentation. It's really exciting to see what you're doing. So thank you for that. One of the things is access, right? How do we enable equitable access? So I love that Laura's able to show us ways that we can do this, and especially mel.org is really easy. And we do have presentations in our archive from coaching quarterly meetings in the past where Ann Kaskinen from NEL has come and talked to us about it. So you can also look those up to see just how to do that. And any family can get that. You need like a driver's license or some other ID to get in, and then you have access. So we were going to look a little bit more, something else that came up. So books was one issue, and assessment and progress monitoring was another theme that came up. And so when we're thinking about, especially with the the updated Essential 9 verbiage, we talk about the ways in which that we really want to lean into the observational and formative data that we can gather for children. And this came up when I was an early literacy coach at Core ISD. Actually, during the pandemic, a lot of people were utilizing the tools from How to Plan Differentiated Reading Instruction. And so I'm going to share with you something that I was able to come up with when a coach reached out. It was actually a Title I teacher reached out and said, "Can you help me? I need this." So one of the things we thought is a possible solution that you could do is, if there isn't, there may already be progress monitoring built in, because if you know the book, How to Plan Differentiated Reading Instruction, there are assessments at the end of each lesson type to help you know whether to move the child on to the next set of lessons or not. But it's the in-between that this person had reached out to me. So maybe you could create a template to track student progress. And then I'm thinking about Nell, and what she talked to us about this morning is that, we want to make sure what we're tracking on this formative assessment or these observations will match what we've actually taught, right? So when she talked about, you want to make sure you actually taught sequence if that's on the rubric that kids are going to be assessed on, right? So it's really that alignment. How do you leverage formative and observational assessments for this? And then again, the matching instruction. And also, we don't want to over-assess. So sometimes we're so busy collecting information, and then what that happens is then we don't get enough teaching in for the kids. And so it's finding that balance of how do we move kids along and expedite their journey in their learning especially in foundational skills, right? If you're working on that, while also not over assessing them. So, and then also, Tanya always talks about that we want to make sure that whatever we assess is informing the instructional decision making that we have. So what I'm going to share with you, some of you will have already seen because you've either been in a group with Dr. Walpole and myself or with Dr. Susan Lally and myself. But one of the possible solutions that I came up with for formative assessment was to make an assessment for the lesson sets. Now, I am not promoting that you use how to plan differentiated reading instruction. This just happens to be a resource that we know everybody has the book of it. And a lot of people are implementing bookworms or we're using this for small group instruction. So this is not a plug for that. Just want to make sure that you all know. So if you want to gather formative assessment, you could use these templates. I actually spoke with Dr. Walpole about these because I said I would never want to share something that would be misaligned with your work. And so obviously, when she and Dr. McKenna wrote the book, they built in progress monitoring already. If you're familiar with it, it's already in there. She said, again, it's to expedite learning, right? We're making sure that nobody is.
So I had to put this meeting at.
We'll make sure that nobody is over assessing kids. However, some places, sometimes kids get stuck in a group, or maybe they're in the wrong group, or sometimes you have a principal that says, no, like we really want to have this in between progress monitoring. And that happened to be the case for the Title I teacher, Jane, that reached out to me. And I said, well, let me see what I can do. So when I talked to Dr. Walpole, her recommendation, just for anyone who thinks they might want to use these, was be helpful to do after 7 to 10 days of instruction. So you're not doing this like every day. Or like if you are supporting a teacher that's looking and saying, I don't feel like this child's in the right group. So I'm going to just show you what these might look like. I made like 2 sets of them. So this is an example from, there's a group of lessons called Basic Alphabet Knowledge in Dr. Walpole's book. And so I made 2 versions of it. One's a broad version. So like if I'm pulling a small group of kids, I can very quickly kind of check how are we doing. And what I did was just go straight to the lesson type. These are the things that you do within a basic alphabet knowledge lesson. You do an alphabet review. You sing the alphabet and you say the alphabet. So you could very quickly just put kids' initials and then you could like check, they're doing it, question mark if you don't get it. Or maybe you're only focusing on like 2 kids one day, 2 kids the next day. Like you'd have the opportunity to obviously figure out how this might work for you. But this, in some ways, if you're working with a teacher who's trying to implement it, I also thought about this as being a supportive educative tool because it actually lays out, like if you're teaching basic alphabet knowledge, it has like exactly what you're going to do for each part of the lesson. So you're going to do alphabet review, initial sound sorting, letter names and sounds, high frequency words, and then tracking memorized text. So these are the lesson parts of that. And this is for a whole group. Like, look at that. Now, the other one that I have here is, let's say you have one child that you're really curious about how they're doing. And again, this is an example. My hope is that this might help you to think about what you might be able to do with a curricular resource that you have that does not have what you're needing in order to do some observational or formative assessment in between like larger assessments. So again, this one, you could just write the student's name or initials or whatever, and then you can, there's a larger space. So that way you can write more notes, especially if it's a child that's like, you know, has an educational plan or something, right? If you have an IEP and you really want to be like thinking about, oh, what is going on with this kid? You'd have a spot to write that. So that's this resource. And then I will, how it lives is it's kind of very long because there's all the different lesson types. So you're going to get a copy of this. It's like bigger, and then you can just print it out and you'll have it for each one of the different kinds of lessons if that's a something that you're using and if it would be helpful for you. So that's one resource. The second resource that I was going to share with you somewhat quickly before we move along was thinking about writing, right? So writing content tends to be, again, something that we as educators don't feel as efficacious about. And then thinking about assessing writing can feel really overwhelming. And so we wanted to share a couple of ways that we thought in the past, like if you wanted to think about assessment with writing, what could that look like? So I am sharing something with you that is close to my heart because it was written by, it's old. Okay, so this is from 1997. It's about dynamic assessment. But Grant and John were 2 of my mentors when I was doing my second master's at the University of New Hampshire. And we did like reading clinics in that work, and they both passed like within a year of each other very suddenly. But their work inspires me every day. And the way that they built rapport with kids around assessment and the way that they taught us, taught the teachers going through that program to do it was really important. And it was talked about like how you're building that rapport with that kid and having a conversation. And so in general, I just pulled this out as this is from a special ed. This research article is from special ed, is available through mel.org. However, the types of things that happen in dynamic assessment, I think, are very relatable and cross over to a tier 1 general education classroom. And another resource I'll share in a moment shares that. But I loved the fact that it says, whether in the classroom or the clinic, the interest is not simply to categorize a child under a particular label or diagnostic scheme, but also to uncover the kind of instruction and educational setting that will lead to continued development, right? Because that's our goal. Who cares if sometimes kids get a label and then they actually don't get the things that they need? So if you're thinking about dynamic assessment, it allows teachers to determine an understanding of where the child is currently. And then you can make a plan for that instruction. What should the child receive? And in writing, the way they write about it in the article is like pretty wonderful. The way that they have like build rapport with the kids. And so it's just a really great one to read. And then you can take what you learn to provide a really specific sort of, this is how much we think this child needs. This is the amount of time, and this is what it should look like. And so in this type of dynamic assessment that they discuss in this article, there's a lot of conversations. They're doing responses to the children that are sharing what they're doing. The writing is absolutely connected to their interests, which very much aligns with Essential 1. Right? We want to be having kids write about things they know when we can. They also have kids rehearse rather in dynamic assessment, and it walks through that rehearsal even in that article. And then they go through the process of drafting and revising and editing. And so just thought it might be something helpful for your toolbox, even though it's written out of special ed. And then it actually connects to a possible solution if writing is not well done, or something that needs a little help in your curricular resource. Is we have this wonderful resource from Dr. Duke and Dr. Ward, the Listening to Reading and Watching While Writing, and several ISD coaches who are amazing are on this site. If you go to that link that you'll have all these, you can see there are different coaches that were engaged in this work when Dr. Wright and Dr. Ward and Dr. Duke were doing this. We didn't meet Dr. Klingelhofer, but all of them did this really great work. And so there's a video here that will be embedded in our presentation if you're interested in that. Where Nell like walks through it. Sorry, I'm not actually gonna have you watch it right now because we don't have time. And then I also just put in the link to like some of the Prezi pieces where it talks about it being informal formative assessment tool to guide attention to really specific aspects of reading and writing to inform instruction. And then it really, when you read more into it, talks about how it complements other assessment tools and screeners that are available. And like one of the things you might be looking for in writing is how are children applying what you've been teaching for their foundational skills. So I love that it talks about this, analyzing the graphophonemic patterns that kids are putting into place. So all of these things are really well built out. And there may be some of you, I can't see everyone, that are on this call that were part of this work that we went through and kind of piloted with Dr. Ward and Dr. Duke. But it was a very lovely experience, and has very specific pieces in here for writing in particular. So just wanted to highlight like that for you because it's free. You have access to it and you can feel free to use it to serve your purposes when you are thinking about problem solving in terms of writing. The last piece of writing that you might have forgotten that we have is when we did the series of the study groups with Dr. Walpole. I also want to make sure we did things particularly connecting to the essential instructional practices, and the very Dr. Tortorelli, who's here with us today, did a whole session with us on scaffolding writing within that. And so you all have access to that, but the link right to the video is in here and to the agenda that we had there. So just wanted to elevate some of these resources so that if writing is an issue with one of the resources that you're looking at with your school, here's like 3 different things that you might be able to utilize in order to help you think about how to beef up the type of ways that you're collecting information through writing assessment and able to see how kids are applying what they're being taught throughout the day. I feel like I just talked really fast. Definitely don't need to watch me talk. So again, if you put any questions in the chat, we'll be happy to look at them. But now it's time for you to get into breakout rooms, and we are going to have you choose the theme that you want to talk about. So we want to make sure that no one is feeling like you have to stay within a certain type of curricular resource or any particular resource at all. What you're thinking about is, are you wanting to think about books as what are the problems with some books in your resource and possible solutions, work samples, pacing time, writing, organization. And so you're going to have an opportunity to choose the breakout room that you go into, and they're organized in this exact same way. Currently, I set it up for 9 breakout rooms, and I'm sorry, no, 9 theme rooms, because there's 9 themes. I have 3 breakout rooms per theme, and if I need to add, I will do that. But I have it set up so you self-select, and then currently, again, I wasn't sure. I know that even if you love being with us, sometimes people have to go to other places, but we've set up this plan for breakout rooms that if you can keep it to 4 or 5, just so you can have conversations, that's great when you self-select and go in there. And then if you can, oh, sorry, this shouldn't say record on the Google Doc. You're going to record it on the Google Sheet that we have right here for you. So you all have editing rights to this, this document. There we go. And so you can go right in, and if you are in books, it'll be books number 1, books number 2, books number 3, and you can just talk about problems, possible solutions, and questions you have. And you have editing rights for this whole thing. So please feel free to put your, names on this so we can know who. And I tried just to like break up the monotony of the slides. You'll see the new theme and like what people had said about that, like in between each set of slides. So there's 3 for each category and theme, and you're just going to pick where you go. I did also link that into the curricular resource, the overall one that we have. Nope, that's not it, but it also should be in this Wakelet. And so I did put it in here. Sorry, right there. And then I did get to put the Wakelets in there. So we'll be in breakouts like about 25 minutes or so. Is that what we're hoping? Yeah, about 25 minutes in breakout rooms.